Okay, all right. Without any further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Harald Koberg. I'm already seeing him there in his field, and he studied philosophy and cultural anthropology at the University of Graz, where he also wrote his dissertation on representations of digital gaming. And he's further working in games journalism and as an expert for media pedagogics at the project Ludovico. And today he'll be talking about, for real, being in the context of digital play. And here he goes.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. I'm including my presentation within this video picture, so if you want to see it, just make my picture larger. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here and honored to be able to start this discussion today. And as you might have guessed from the title, I'm talking about the relations between digital play and concepts of reality, because I think that's a field where a lot can be done. Maybe a starting thought about that. Most of you, I guess, will have seen Mark Zuckerberg's presentation of the metaverse and the future of us interacting digitally. And for all of us playing games or thinking about games, I guess most of us will have thought, well, what's new about that? We've been doing that for 15 or 20 years, being an avatar within the game and meeting other people there, interacting in a bodily manner. It just doesn't seem to be very new if you've played video games for the last decades. And this leads to one or even the two of the arguments I'm building towards with my little talk today. The first one is that I believe that there's still a lot of exploration to be done, looking at this relation between ontological questions of reality and constructing realities, and digital play. So there are a lot of concepts around. Many of them can somehow be combined, I believe, but there's still a lot that we haven't been able to grasp theoretically in that field. And the second argument is somehow arguing towards a strong self-confidence of game studies and people thinking about games and playing video games. Because if we look at present-day philosophical thought on subjectivity, on post-humanist thought, and so on and so forth, I believe that the experiences we are making when studying people who play digital games are on the forefront of these experiences that are being discussed there. So in post-humanist thought, there's a lot of deconstructing the subjective experience going on, and thinking about these or breaking up these dichotomies of nature and culture and body and tools and so on and so forth. And I believe that we as people working and researching games and playing games, of course, we have experienced a lot of that, and we need to find and use a language in order to use that, because then we can contribute to the bigger debates, philosophical debates and other debates going on at the moment, trying to understand what these new digital media are doing with us as social beings. So I guess in this round that has come here together today, I don't really need to introduce the concept of the magic circle. It has been discussed very intensely, even though the whole discussion was somehow built on something that Johan Huizinga never wrote like that. But the idea that has been discussed was that play is happening within a magic circle, and it doesn't have any relevance for things that happen outside of this circle. And of course, there has been strong arguments against it, because we cannot explain the cultural relevance of play if we think it's totally detached from the realities around it. And to sum up this very first thought on this very first context, I just want to quote Celia Pierce, who said or wrote, "The magic circle is really nothing more than a mutual agreement to abide by a set of social constraints." So, of course, there's this social understanding that if I insult somebody during playing games, it's not the same as if I insult the same person outside of the game. But still, of course, there's a lot of interaction between inside and outside of the game. But there's another concept that is, I think, much more present in present-day debates about the state of playing video games. is present in games academia, I would argue, but it's also very present if you talk to people in a broader publics, which I do a lot in my professional work. I'm working with teachers and youth workers and parents and many people watching and seeing digital play from the outside. And there's this picture of this full immersion going around, which means there's a player, and this player moves through some kind of ontological wall to be somebody else or something else for a certain amount of time in this other world. And this is a picture of people leaving one reality to be in another reality and then leaving that reality again. And a lot of criticism of digital game play, for example, are built on this, the whole violence debate, for example. If I enjoy violence within these worlds, then at some point I will enjoy them outside of these worlds. And if I think life is that easy and processing through life is as easy as it is in games, that I might be disappointed by the way it's outside of this, and so on and so forth. And I still find this picture in some academic texts about digital play, and also the way the games industry presents themselves. They want to sell the full immersion with VR technology getting better and better. There's this very strong argument that now we reach this full immersion and so on and so forth. And I think if we look at what is happening when people play games, we quickly realize that this doesn't explain it, and this is not what is happening. We're not leaving our physical reality. And to understand that, and that's already one thing that builds towards my second main argument here, that video games and talking to people who play video games can help us to understand what is happening there. Well, if we do so, we realize that it's much more complex, even in the language they use. And I want to introduce you to a little story I've been told by somebody I interviewed for my dissertation, and he was telling me about playing Resident Evil. I think it was Resident Evil Biohazard at that time, some time home alone. And he said, I was home alone. Outside there was this storm, and after climbing down some stairs, I turned around with the mouse, and there was this girl or ghost girl right above me. Seriously, I almost fell off my chair. And for people talking about video games and who are used to talking to others and telling stories like this seems to be a very normal occasion or a very, very normal experience when playing games. But if you look at this little story from an ontological point of view, there's so many different layers there, because of course, being home alone and the storm outside, that's what happened in the physical reality. Him climbing down some stairs was what happening in the game. And then in this next sentence, it somehow all culminates when he says, I turned around with the mouse. Which tells us that he's conscious of his hand on the mouse moving himself around, but at the same time he talks about the avatar turning around as himself, so in first person. So I think there's a lot to be taken from quotes like this, because they show us that players are very used to merging all these different aspects of reality and of not separating them. But also we know that sometimes players talk about their avatars in third person. That's usually can be seen when they feel detached from it in some way. For example, I don't know, people complaining about Link saying, I don't know why he can't jump, for example. He can fight all those monsters, but he can't jump over that fence. Why isn't he able to do that? Or often in the third person comes up when they talk about cutscenes, for example. So coming back to this picture, I think it's pretty clear that it's not the way it works, but it's rather a state of being in between, or being inside and outside of the game at the same time. As I said in the beginning, there are a lot of concepts around. I used Gordon Calleja's concept of incorporation, for example, that helps to explain this, but there are many others around that somehow make us understand that to be able to play a game successfully, we need to be inside and outside of the game at the same time. We need to enjoy it and move through it in a bodily manner by somehow embodying the avatar, or being embodied in the game through the avatar. But at the same time, we also need to be conscious about the rules of the game, the meta thoughts about the game, and of course the fact that we are turning around with the mouse or with the controller. So there's this bodily presence at the same time. And this is the argument that a lot of thought about digital subjectivity is building towards, is that what these digital tools do, whether they be games or other digital tools, is that they just enhance our possibilities. The avatar can be seen as a tool that gives me possibilities to interact with new worlds, to interact with people in new ways, and to experience myself and my subjectivity in a new way. So if you want, this concept can be very closely related to the idea of a cyborg, to technological enhancements of my own self and my possibilities. And for those of you a little familiar with post-humanist thought, that you might already realize the bridge there, because this concept of the cyborg is very strongly used there. And this has been started by Donna Haraway and her very influential text, the Cyborg Manifesto, which is a feminist text first and foremost, and in which she deconstructs our concepts of subjectivity and these dichotomies that I've listed before, in order to show where freedom can be found in order to detach oneself from the power structures in a certain way that are moving towards us or are influencing us through our bodily experience. So one thing Donna Haraway says is, she writes, the cyborg is a condensed image of both imagination and material reality. And that's pretty much what we've just seen what happens when we play video games as well. There's somehow this imagination and this imaginative aspect of it, but there's still the bodily presence. I would argue that this is the one important thing, that we can never leave this bodily presence behind. We can leave the avatar behind, but not this bodily presence. But this is already a hint that the whole thing is very complex. So coming back to the player, we cannot just say that the player is this one way of experience things. So Miguel Sicart has created this idea of player subjectivity, or the player subject, that is also very strongly built on early thoughts on towards post-humanist theory. And he says there are so many things at work when we play video games, and so many ways of subjective experience. So as a player, of course, we experience games in a playful manner. We have the rules of the game, and we want to abide to the rules of the game in order to be successful playing the game. There's the narrative aspect to most video games, or you could argue that it's there in all of the games. There's a story being told, and to some extent we're able to interact with this story. And of course there's the social aspect, and as I would very strongly argue, this is not just there when we play online or in couch co-op or whatsoever, but also if we play games home alone and offline, there's a very strong social aspect to that. Millions of people are playing Elden Ring at the moment, and as Jesper Juhl has taught us in one of his books, the motivation to beat these very difficult games very strongly comes from knowing that there are other people out there who have already beaten that boss. So there's a strong social aspect there. So with all these three layers, we interact with the avatar when we play. And of course, the avatar also interacts with us, because the possibilities he gives us, if you look at it as a tool, there's things I can do with this avatar and things I won't be able to do with it. And of course, as you see already, this avatar has many layers of being as well. He's a game piece, so he's just a piece I'm using to be successful within the game, following the rules of the game. He's also a character in a story, and there can be a lot of conflicts there between the way I want to experience the game and the way the story is being told and the avatar behaves within the game. for example, interviewed people who said they couldn't play GTA 4 because they just couldn't go along with the way Niko Bellic behaves. And of course, the avatar is also a representation of ourselves within the game. But if you look at this public discourse, for example, I believe that the representation is seen very strongly, while the other layers that I've been listing here are not being seen and not being thought about. So we still, as I showed you in the picture earlier, we still often have this picture of us being the avatar, and that's this representational aspect being pushed to the front, even though it's just one of the layers that are happening there. But of course, that's still not it, because me as a player, I'm still very strongly influenced by a social background I'm coming from. I might enjoy GTA because I enjoy doing things that I deem to be evil outside of the game. So this is my social background. I might enjoy playing FIFA because I can win the Champions League, and that's something that's highly valued in the social background I'm coming from. So there's a lot of interaction, of course, with the social background. But if you talk to players and let them talk about their games, you sometimes find out that there is one more layer that they reflect themselves when talking about games. Because, for example, when they talk about Link not being able to jump, I sometimes hear sentences like, "I don't know why they don't let him jump." So it's not just the avatar not being able to jump, but there's someone behind the avatar who decided not to make the avatar jump. And to go into that, I need to disappear here to make the screen bigger for the presentation, because there's the game designer, of course, who has very strong influence on what the avatar does and what he can do and how he can interact with the game world. So there's a very strong interaction there, and you could argue that playing a game is a form of communication between players and game designers. And this has become even more relevant now that game designers get so much feedback about the way games are being played, because they can later on patch the game and build new stuff according to what people enjoyed playing the game. So I would argue that the avatar is as much a representation of me as a player as it is of the game designers and their ideas of building a game. And of course, there's also the social background of the game designers, which can be the smaller social background of a game studio, for example, that also needs to make money. So they also need to build games that are able to make money. That's one of the things they want to do. But there's also the broader social background. Many of us, for example, might enjoy Japanese games because they tell these weird stories, and we of course experience them as being weird because the social background the game is coming from is very different from the one we are coming from. So as you see here, there's a lot of different layers going on, and as the players in their own language, and I would argue even academia, did not yet find a way to fully grasp all these different aspects that are going on here. And I think that's one of the huge potentials of playing games. It's a huge potential for us, but especially for players themselves, because they have these spaces opening up, these spaces in between, as I call them, where it's not so clear what part of it is real and what part is not real, and what part is me and what part is not me. And that's where interaction gets so interesting. And that's a second very important part and aspect of it. This player-avatar relation is not so far away from subject-body relation that we have outside of the games. That's something we often forget in discussions like that, when we said there's the real physical world and then there's this digital world. Because of course I'm being given a body, and this body is my tool to interact with the physical world, and of course I'm somehow bound to that body. But at the same time, there are a lot of experiences where the body does not behave in the way we want it to behave, or where the body is not able to do things that I as a subject decided to do. There's a beautiful interview by Celia Pierce where she interviewed a community leader of an online game who was sitting in a wheelchair, and she said, she feels better represented by her avatar in the game than by her body outside of the game, because she doesn't experience herself as a person who cannot walk or jump. And the avatar can do that, but she, with her physical body, cannot do that. So understanding how players and avatars interact also tells us a lot about how subjects and bodies interact, and how bodies are tools to interact with a physical world, while avatars are tools to interact with a digital world. Of course, with a lot of differences there, but I think that's the second argument I wanted to make, that you can take a lot of practical examples from digital play if you want to understand what all these post-humanist theories, for example, are talking about. So, coming back to Donna Haraway and coming back to me, I just want to somehow sum it up with 3 quotes and a few thoughts on that. She writes, the cyborg is a kind of disassembled and reassembled postmodern collective and personal self. And I think that's pretty much what we've just seen in this last picture of all these different influences on the avatar, and all of them, of course, influencing each other. We as players are influenced by the game designers, and they by us, and the avatar by us, and so on and so forth. So it's not easy, and I would argue it's even not possible to draw straight lines where the own subjectivity and the own agency ends and where the other agency and subjectivity begins. But as she writes it here, it's disassembled and reassembled, and it's a collective. So coming to another quote, which is very important for my research, she says, the cyborg is not subject to Foucault's biopolitics. The cyborg simulates politics, a much more potent field of operations. And that's something I found very strongly in my field research, that players use digital games to evade certain power structures, and modern day power structures, as Foucault has shown us in his theory of biopolitics, they reach us through our bodily experience. And if digital worlds give us the possibility to leave behind parts of that bodily experience, then that leads us to some new forms of freedom. Always, of course, with the great caveat of these gaming worlds being designed by industries who have their own very strong interests doing that. But still, players experience it as an empowerment and as a possibility to leave aspects of their bodily existence behind that they feel limited by. And one last quote from Donna Haraway, cyborg politics is the struggle for language and the struggle against perfect communication, against one code that translates all meanings perfectly. And there, of course, you see the feminist aspect of this theory, but it's also, I believe, what I experienced and what I guess many others experience when analyzing the fascination of playing video games. And that's what I've been arguing towards and saying a few times in my talk now, that it's still eluding us in some way what is happening there. We still can't grasp it with one theory. It's still not possible to clearly say, up to here this is real and now there's a change of reality, or up to here this is you and now it's not you anymore. And it's exactly this impossibility to fully grasp what is happening there that is opening up these interesting spaces that are interesting for the players themselves, because they feel empowered, they use them for their own experiences of freedom. But it's also very interesting from an academic point of view, and it's a great opportunity, I guess, for us as game academics to add towards the bigger discussions of what digital worlds and digital interactions in games do with concepts of bodily existence and subjectivity and so on and so forth. So thank you very much. I hope I'm not far beyond the 20 minutes, and I'm very much looking forward towards the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harald. That was very interesting, inspiring, and a good start and kickoff for our kickoff workshop, I'd say. In order to see in which order questions pop up, I would recommend that you write Q in the chat instead of raising your hand, because if the debate will get a little lively at some point, I might mix up who was first and who came next. So if you would just please write Q in the chat, then I can see in which order I can ask. And I already see there are already questions. Stefan Hölken was the first one to.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk, which was very inspiring, because it reminds me of a thing I thought some years ago when you spoke about the player as a communicator in between the avatar as a tool to communicate between the player and the designer of the game. It is a problem for all of us to analyze computer games when we do not have any formal things, codes, backgrounds, copyrighted things to look onto. So I thought of how it would be to see the avatar as a kind of let's say sociologist who enters the game and plays the game as a kind of researcher. And there has been a video game in the 1980s called Little Computer People, which exactly points to this idea that the avatar and the player, that the player of the computer game is a kind of sociologist who examines the game and the behaviors of the avatar, and who has even a protocol to write to find out how these little computer people are ticking. I think we should keep it in background to think about these new kind of cyborg you spoke of, where the gamer and the avatar are melting each other, not only to have fun but to learn something from the game or about the game while playing it.
Yeah, I would strongly well, I believe that
have to go to the next talk. And yes, I already saw that the recording is getting fired up again. So thank you, Harald, for your talk, and thank you all for the discussion. I would have loved to jump in myself, because a lot of what you were saying was also discussed in my PhD, but we have to proceed.